Realm presents Ninth Step Murders, Episode 6.
It was a beautiful morning in Odaiba, and the tourists milling about the promenade included a Chinese father and his 10-year-old daughter. At the father's request, their driver had parked several hundred meters away, so fewer people would see the flags on the diplomatic vehicle. Now the father was on his mobile phone while his daughter ran circles around him. Her excited screeching and the crowd noise were making it difficult to conduct his call.
Wait,
the father said in Mandarin, then pulled the phone away from his face to look at its screen.
I've only got one bar on this garbage phone. No, it's a loaner from the embassy. My phone won't work this far into the Japanese sector.
There it is!
His daughter jumped up and down.
Papa, do you see it? It's right over there!
Okay, good,
the father said.
Stay close to the statue. Don't go anywhere else, Annie.
His last sentence was shouted at his daughter's receding back. The father sighed. The head of the unicorn Gundam statue was just visible on the other side of the building next to him. His daughter had fallen in love with giant robots, mechs, and had been begging to visit this tourist trap ever since he was assigned to Tokyo, after the war.
I'll find a better signal,
the father said into his phone. He made sure he could still see his daughter's ponytail bobbing up and down as she skipped toward the statue, then turned off the main pedestrian walkway and went southwest toward the water. The noise from the crowds crescendoed. The father looked back toward the promenade and saw two distinct groups of protesters converging on the Gundam statue. One group was marching with signs and banners saying "No foreign mischief," if his Japanese was accurate. The other group's slogans included "Good business without borders" and "Free economy equals peaceful economy."
I'll call you back.
The father hung up his phone. He jogged toward the statue. Loud, fast footfalls approached, and he saw uniformed Tokyo MPD officers running at the protesters. The father called out his daughter's name. His military training kept panic at bay and kept him focused on his objective. One protester threw a punch at another just before the officers reached the statue, and the two opposing waves of people surged and crashed into each other. Police whistles sounded all around the plaza. The father had nearly reached the police line when his driver appeared and grabbed his arm, holding him back.
Careful, sir. Nobody knows you're here. Annie could be getting trampled in there,
the father cried.
She's not in there.
The driver held up his arm, showing a local map on his glowing data sleeve.
Her sleeve location is this way.
The driver led the father toward the side of the building. He continued calling for his daughter with increasing distress.
Behind that sign.
The driver pointed.
She's probably hiding, just like you taught her to do if there was trouble.
The father ran up to the sign and then around it. He knelt down and picked up a cracked piece of orange plastic. It was his daughter's data sleeve. His world shrank to only one purpose. The father ignored his driver's yelling and strode back to the police line. One uniformed officer saw him approaching and held up both gloved hands.
Please go back, sir. The situation is under control.
The father held up his government identification card and said in Japanese,
I am Lieutenant Colonel Ting Yupei, Chief Liaison Officer to the Japanese government for the People's Republic of China. The situation is not under control, and I demand that you summon Inspector Miyako here right now.
Act 1. The riot police unit cleared away the protesters before Miyako and Emma arrived at Unicorn Gundam Plaza. Miyako dimly recalled visiting Odaiba long ago on a school trip, and she hadn't been that interested then either. Emma seemed to be more of a fan.
That is impressive.
Emma said as they stepped out of their vehicle and released it to go park itself.
I mean, I've seen pictures, but wow. That is for real a giant robot.
It's just a statue, Miyako said.
I know. Don't you get excited about anything?
Miyako watched another police vehicle pull up. I think we're about to get very excited. Superintendent Nishimura tumbled out of the car. He did not look happy.
Inspector! Lieutenant! Explain what's going on here.
We don't know, Superintendent, Miyako said.
We just got here,
Emma added quickly. If I may ask, Superintendent, what is your interest in this case? Miyako said. The dispatcher said the complainant was Chinese, but surely that's not enough to involve someone at your level.
Is it because it's a kidnapping?
Emma asked.
The complainant is a high-ranking Chinese government official.
Nishimura led them past the cordon and into the shade of the building, where 2 officers were waiting with a 3rd man.
His daughter is only 10 years old, and she disappeared in the middle of a protest that became a riot. I don't think I need to explain to you the politics of the situation.
Emma and Miyako exchanged a look.
Fair enough.
The man between the 2 uniforms stepped forward, and when his face entered the sunlight, Miyako nearly tripped over her own feet. She caught herself and snuck a glance over at Emma to verify that she also recognized him.
Lieutenant Colonel Ting,
Nishimura said in English, shaking the man's hand.
I am Superintendent Nishimura Hideo of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department. As you requested, here is Inspector Koreda Miyako, and also her partner, Lieutenant Higashi Emma, who has been seconded to us by the United States peacekeeping forces.
Ting nodded at each woman in turn, and Miyako had to admire his poker face. Then again, he'd had time to prepare himself for this.
Thank you, Superintendent. Inspector, I requested your involvement in this matter because of your performance at the Olympics.
That was a long time ago, Miyako said to Ting, ignoring Emma's inquisitive stare. Miyako had never felt the need to bring up her past life as an athlete. And my performance was not exemplary.
4th place in the world is still noteworthy, but I'm not talking about judo.
Ting said.
I'm talking about the incident in the Olympic Village. I was visiting with the Chinese delegation when it happened. We never met, but I saw how you intervened. It was very admirable.
Thank you, Miyako said tightly.
And you've been stalking her since then?
Emma asked.
I was briefed on all senior authorities in Tokyo when I accepted my current position as liaison,
Ting said with a glare that urged them to follow his lead in papering over the truth.
Most of them were instantly forgettable, but your partner makes quite an impression. Inspector Koreda and Lieutenant Higashi will do their best to locate your daughter quickly, Lieutenant Colonel,
Nishimura said.
I will provide whatever assistance I can as well.
He held out a business card.
Thank you.
Ting pocketed the card. Nishimura's sleeve buzzed, and he slapped it after an annoyed glance.
I must go.
He pointed at Miyako and Emma.
Cooperate with all Chinese authorities.
What does that mean? Emma muttered as he turned and stalked off. Politics. Miyako asked Emma to download statements from the 2 uniformed officers' data slaves, and then, once everyone else was out of earshot, leaned forward and spoke to Ting in English. Now, do you want to tell us what's really going on here?
You know what's going on,
Ting said as Emma joined the huddle.
My daughter, Annie, was kidnapped.
You're the PRC's chief liaison officer,
Emma said.
You expect us to believe that you didn't know there was going to be a protest here today?
I may have advantages in the Chinese sector, Lieutenant,
Ting said.
But I'm not so well connected on this side of the border.
So today just happened to be Bring Your Daughter to Work Day, and you just happened to bring her to Protest Ground Zero, and you just happened to remember that Miyako was on call?
I did request you specifically,
Ting said to Miyako.
That is true. I couldn't tell everybody here how we met before, but there is nobody in Tokyo who I would trust more to locate my daughter. You found out who killed Rincho, and you kept our previous conversation in confidence.
He turned back to Emma.
If you would prefer not to be trusted, now is a good time to let me know.
You can trust us, Miyako said. But can we trust you? Ting clenched his jaw.
My daughter is missing, Inspector. My family. Do you think there is anything I would not do to get her back?
I suppose we'll find out. Shouts echoed from the other side of the plaza. Miyako couldn't see who was shouting. Emma frowned.
That sounds like
Chinese, Miyako finished. Mandarin.
My apologies,
Ting said.
I was going to mention that my government insisted on sending some of our own investigators.
Two dark-haired men broke through the police cordon and fast-walked toward Ting, waving their identification badges. The one in front was stocky and working his jaw around a significant wad of gum. The second was taller, thinner, and smoking a cigarette.
Chinese cops,
Emma grumbled. Miyako held her tongue, but sent a quick mail to Nishimura. We're allowing Chinese law enforcement into our jurisdiction now?
Tokyo's finest,
the stockier man said in English, making Miyako bristle.
I'm Detective Liu. That's Detective Wong.
Liu waved at Ting and spoke in Mandarin, faster than Miyako could follow. The three Chinese men gathered and spat syllables back and forth. Miyako looked at Emma. I don't suppose you speak Mandarin? Emma shook her head.
I know some good curses and insults. Those might come in handy.
Miyako's sleeve buzzed with a reply from Nishimura.
It's over my head, but better a couple of cops than a couple of tanks.
Superintendent Nishimura reminds us that this is a very delicate situation.
Hey!
Liu waved at Emma and Miyako.
Stop gossiping, ladies. Did your forensics people already check the crime scene?
Colonel Ting found his daughter's data sleeve, Miyako said. Lab work will take a few hours.
What about the rest of the scene?
Liu gestured around vaguely.
There was just a riot here, in case you hadn't noticed,
Emma said.
Forensics are doing their best.
If you say so.
Liu spat his gum out on the pavement, ignoring both women's disgusted looks, and tapped at his data sleeve.
Okay, girls. Let's go to whatever you're calling a police station these days. Who wants to give us driving directions? Which roads have the fewest potholes?
Emma gestured for one of the uniforms to handle that, then grabbed Miyako's shoulder and turned her toward the parking lot.
Come on. I'll teach you some Mandarin on our way back.
Maybe something about mothers, Miyako said. Emma wondered if Nishimura had left the blinds in his office window open on purpose. From the bullpen, nobody could hear what he and Ting were saying through the bulletproof glass, but everyone could see how aggressively they were gesticulating. 5 minutes and counting. Miyako led the Chinese detectives back from the kitchen area. She handed Emma a cup of tea and sipped at her own, while Liu monologued about how Japanese tea was botanically, culturally, and in all other ways inferior to Chinese teas. Wong still hadn't said a word. He was also still holding a cigarette between his lips. Unlit. Emma supposed this was to nominally respect the no-smoking rule inside Ninth Step Station. Emma stared at Wong.
Do you talk?
He shrugged, removed the cigarette with 2 slender fingers, and sipped at his tea without changing his facial expression.
Right,
Emma muttered.
I got Pen and fucking Teller over here.
What? Miyako said.
Never mind.
What do you think, Lieutenant Higashi?
Liu pointed at her.
Is this the worst tea in the city or what?
I'm sure we can find you worse.
Emma said without missing a beat.
Funny. Not just a pretty face.
Liu winked, and for a moment Miyako was prepared to tackle Emma before she could cause an international incident.
Anyway, Wang and I have been working the Chinese sector for... how long now?
He turned to his partner. Wang held up 4 fingers.
4 months, yeah.
Liu shook his head.
Things have not improved in that time. But we know this city, and we have ideas about who the kidnappers might be.
We should not jump to any conclusions, Miyako said. Let's wait for some evidence to come back before we decide which leads to follow.
Is this why it takes forever to get anything done here?
Liu tossed back the rest of his tea.
Oh, that is awful. Come on, let's go before we have to sit through another blackout.
Fine, let's talk about your suspicions,
Emma said.
Who do you think is behind this and why?
Well, I wouldn't put it beyond some of those protesters to steal someone's kid.
Liu said.
How would anybody know that Annie was Lieutenant Colonel Ting's daughter?
Do you honestly believe there were no resistance members in that crowd?
Liu asked.
No spies planted by your local crime bosses, who have a vested interest in the financial shenanigans that would be outlawed by the new anti-foreign mischief that those people were protesting? No dirty cops.
That was too much for Miyako. She could stomach uninformed speculation about criminal gangs or city politics, but not her fellow police.
You have no foundation to accuse us of corruption.
Calm down, woman,
Liu said.
I'm just repeating what I hear on the news. People say they can't trust the police.
News? You mean propaganda?
Emma stepped between Miyako and Liu.
This is not helping.
Liu popped his gum loudly.
We can't afford to eliminate any suspects yet. If we don't catch the kidnappers, people's suspicions will increase and things will get worse for everyone in Tokyo. And if the kid turns up dead...
That will not happen, Miyako snapped.
I'm glad we're on the same page,
Liu said.
So let's go out and shake some trees, and watch for who runs when they see the cops coming.
What are you like on the shooting range, Liu?
Emma asked.
Spray and pray? Is that your philosophy?
Liu grinned.
If you want to play with my gun, sweetheart, all you have to do is ask.
Miyako was just about to offer to kick his teeth in, if Emma wasn't going to do it herself, when Nishimura's door slammed open. She whirled around and saw Ting walking toward them, one hand cradling the other arm. His data slave glowed with activity. Nishimura followed, a horrified expression on his face.
What's happened?
Miyako asked.
My daughter,
Ting said.
Annie.
He held up his sleeve to show a video looping across the display surface. Miyako asked if she could send the video to a larger screen, and Ting nodded shakily and tapped at his interface. Miyako went over to the nearest wall and caught the data stream. The wall screen blinked and showed Ting's daughter Annie, her face wet with tears, tied to a chair in a small room. A table sat in her lap, playing a live news feed from a local Tokyo station, so they could see that this video had been recorded today. Miyako couldn't understand most of what Annie was saying through her weeping, but she did catch the words father and help in Mandarin. A chill went down her spine when the video changed to a still image of Chinese characters. Miyako couldn't read all the kanji, but the figure at the top, 10 million yuan, was clear as day.
10 million yuan to see her alive again,
Liu read out loud, followed by an epithet in Mandarin.
Our data miners have a copy of the video now,
Nishimura said.
They will make its analysis a top priority.
Thank you. Ting stared at his sleeve. He turned away, and Miyako heard him sniffling. She stepped back to give him some privacy. Act 2. The small boat docked at the end of Pier 19 in Tokyo Yumenoshima Marina was named Suzuki Maru. It bobbed peacefully next to the pier as 6 pairs of steel-toed boots marched down the wooden planks as quietly as they could, following a small Tokyo MPD flying camera drone. The emergency response team captain didn't fully understand the techniques used to identify this location. His orders from 9 Step Station explained that the data miners had analyzed the motion of the handheld camera used to make the ransom video and the angle of daylight through the windows, thus pinpointing this exact boat. But the most important thing to the ERT captain was Superintendent Nishimura's legal authorization to breach. One commando yanked open the hatch leading below the boat's main deck, and the drone dropped into the opening. The captains watched the live feeds from the drone's multiple sensors, visible light, infrared, and radio frequencies, in his helmet, until he was satisfied that nobody was waiting to ambush his men. The ERT commandos clumsily slid one by one into the boat's lower cabin. The captain followed, grunting when he confirmed with his own eyes what had appeared indistinctly on the drone video. Every wall in the cabin was covered with small paper banners, each one printed with identical kanji.
Does anybody read Chinese?
The captain asked.
I do, sir,
said one commando.
The papers all say the same thing. Try to find us again and she dies.
Miyako failed to convince Liu and Wang to ride with her and Emma in the same vehicle. Liu insisted that having a second car would help if they needed to split up. And more to the point, he wanted to drive, instead of sitting in a modular back seat. Miyako suspected he really just wanted to show off his shiny new GAC motor GE7. It would serve him right if somebody recognized the Chinese-made sedan and got riled up enough to vandalize it. The apartment building they were visiting now had below-ground parking. That meant Miyako and Emma had to ride the elevator up with Liu and Wang, and this building allowed smoking.
Hold the fucking phone,
Emma blurted.
Am I smelling flavors, Wang? Are you smoking scented fucking cigarettes over there?
Don't get him started,
Liu warned.
He'll talk your ear off about that shit. Apparently you can order customized flavor combinations online, and you can infuse them yourself into any normal cigarette to enhance.
Yeah, good thing I didn't ask about any of that,
Emma said loudly. Several doors in the residential hallway were crisscrossed with caution tape and marked as unfit for human habitation. Miyako convinced Liu and Wang to hang back, while the only one of them who was actually a Tokyo police inspector rang the doorbell to their person of interest's apartment. The gray-haired man who answered the door hardly looked like the kidnapping type, but Miyako reminded herself that anyone was capable of anything under the right circumstances. She had seen that during the war. She verified the man's identity, confirmed that he was Kenji Suzuki, owner of the Suzuki Maru, and checked his vessel registration and documentation for Yumenoshima Marina.
I haven't gone sailing in several months,
he said.
The travel restrictions imposed by the Chinese make it difficult. But my son, Masahiro, he also uses the boat.
Suzuki sighed.
Did he do something? Is there a fine?
Miyako assured Suzuki that they were only investigating a minor vandalism complaint, and thanked him for his time. The detectives had to drive their cars out of the garage before Miyako had enough signal to obtain the son's information from the police computer. But that meant Liu and Wang didn't have the address, and had to follow Miyako and Emma. She waved them to the back of Masahiro Suzuki's apartment building as she pulled up to the front entrance.
Which floor?
Emma asked, getting out of the car. 5th. Miyako looked up just in time to see a face disappearing from one of the windows.
Was that him? Couldn't tell, but let's assume the worst.
Emma activated the radio on her sleeve.
We'll stop him,
Liu replied. Miyako led the way into the building and up to the 5th floor, where she and Emma found Masahiro's front door wide open. Emma raised her sleeve as they ran back down the stairs, her pistol in her other hand.
Liu, you see anyone yet?
No, are you sure he came this way?
Just hold position and keep a lookout.
Miyako accosted an older woman in the lobby and asked if she had seen any young men run past. The woman shook her head, clearly shocked at the sight of Emma's gun. Miyako thanked her, apologized for the disruption, and followed her partner out the front.
Go around back.
Emma waved her toward the side of the building.
I'll stay here in case he comes out later. You make sure Jay and Silent Bob don't do anything stupid.
Miyako held the urge to say it was already too late for that, and pulled out her tonfa as she ran to the back of the building. She heard shouting in badly accented Japanese as she approached. Drop your weapon, maybe? That wasn't a good sign. She quickened her pace. Just before she rounded the corner, 2 loud gunshots echoed off the surrounding buildings. Miyako skidded to a halt in front of a man's body, twisted and crumpled on the ground. Liu and Wang both had their guns drawn, and the barrel of Liu's service revolver was still smoking. Miyako felt lightheaded, and suddenly wondered if she had fallen into some kind of cartoon, a caricature of reality where everything was exaggerated to the point of being ludicrous. A scream from above brought her back to the here and now. She waved her sleeve at the person watching from a window, identifying her as police, and put away her tonfa. Liu had stepped forward and was nudging the body with one shoe.
Stop that,
Miyako yelled.
and put away your weapons. He doesn't even have a gun.
What is that, then?
Liu asked, ignoring her command and gesturing at something underneath the body. Miyako knelt, checked for a pulse, then gently rolled the dead man onto his back. Her heart nearly stopped when she recognized first Masahiro Suzuki, and then the object he had been carrying. It was black, metallic, and could have been mistaken for a sawed-off shotgun or small automatic weapon if you only glanced at it. But Miyako recognized it from several weeks ago, when she had met a group of young thieves in the basement of the U.S. Peacekeepers Hotel. She hadn't realized at the time, but they worked for the Resistance. The object was a coil of American fuel cells. Advanced technology, extremely valuable on the black market. Useful to anyone who needed extra power for just about anything from heating to high-energy particle physics.
What the fuck?
Came Emma's voice.
What the ever-loving fuck?
I thought he had a weapon.
Liu shouted.
Look at that thing. It could have been a rifle.
Emma joined Miyako, kneeling on the other side of the body.
Shit. This is one of ours. I mean, it's American. Someone stole a couple crates of fuel cells a few weeks back. We suspected Japanese resistance, but we couldn't be sure. Shit.
We need an evidence bag. Miyako felt numb.
I'll get one.
Emma stood.
You two, holster your weapons, damn it!
They waited until 2 uniformed officers arrived to secure the crime scene. Miyako had plenty of time to watch Masahiro Suzuki's body leak blood from the bullet wounds in his chest. She had more than enough time to wonder if he would still be alive if she had done something to stop those resistance thieves. Even if he hadn't been one of them, she couldn't remember all the faces, as dark as it was down there and as nervous as she had been. Maybe if she had stopped their thieving, it would have forestalled whatever chain of events had led to Masahiro having this coil today. Maybe he wouldn't have felt the need to take it with him when he ran. Maybe Liu and Wang wouldn't have mistaken it for a weapon and wouldn't have shot him dead. Maybe. The 4 detectives searched Masahiro's apartment together. They found propaganda leaflets, encrypted flash drives, small quantities of illegal drugs, and other contraband. Nothing nearly as valuable as that coil of fuel cells. Nothing that he might have been willing to die for.
Resistance,
Liu said with disgust, holding up one of the leaflets. It looked like a restaurant takeout menu, but when activated by body heat, the e-ink changed to a litany of complaints against the Chinese government.
I'm not surprised, though. If anyone would kidnap and ransom a child to fund themselves...
Liu, you need to stop talking right now,
Emma said. Miyako stared at the pile of evidence on the kitchen table.
Just don't feel too bad about his passing,
Liu said.
Okay, out,
Emma said. Miyako heard shuffling footsteps behind her.
We'll meet you back at the station.
But...
Out!
Miyako heard the door clicking shut, a lock turning, then pounding and muffled cursing. Emma walked around the table and stood in Miyako's line of sight.
You okay?
Emma asked quietly. Yes. Miyako nodded. Thank you.
Those guys are assholes.
They're not the problem. Standing still had given Miyako time to collect her thoughts. It's too convenient. This is too easy.
If you're calling this easy...
Suzuki Masahiro is with the Resistance. Miyako pointed at the assembled evidence on the table. That is clear from all this. But why use his own father's vessel to hide the child? Why make it that easy for us to trace her location directly to him?
Angry people don't always think straight.
A kidnapping like this isn't a one-person operation. It requires advanced planning, organization.
Which the Resistance could do.
But if they did plan it, they wouldn't let Suzuki hide the child on his own. He would have had help. Emma frowned.
You're right. It doesn't add up.
She placed her hands on the table.
You think he was framed?
I think there are other people who would benefit from casting suspicion on the Resistance. People who can use the obvious political aspects of this kidnapping as a smokescreen. Miyako sighed. We should talk to Kensuke. Act 3. Emma agreed that the fuel cells had to go to Tokyo MPD's evidence locker until the case was closed, but she photographed and scanned the coil with her sleeve before the CSIs took possession.
I'm going to share this with the peacekeepers,
she told Miyako from the passenger seat as they returned to Ninth Step Station. Miyako insisted on driving the car manually, and Emma figured it was better for her to have something to do instead of stewing in her aggravation at the Chinese detectives.
Just so they can confirm the origin of the fuel cells.
Good idea, Miyako replied flatly. Emma tilted her sleeve toward herself so Miyako couldn't see the interface, and uploaded the fuel cell data to the U.S. liaison's office. Less than a minute later, her sleeve buzzed with an incoming video call. Emma declined it. She had been hoping that Charles would be out of the office. She sent him a text message.
Can't talk now. Just wanted you to see this.
He replied almost instantly.
Where did you find it?
Ongoing police investigation, but it looks like it was stolen by Japanese resistance.
Interesting.
Emma frowned.
Is that all you have to say?
Very interesting.
Emma put her sleeve to sleep and said,
The peacekeepers thank us for the information.
When they arrived at the Organized Crime Bureau, Kensuke handed Emma a small envelope.
What's this?
She asked. Nice to see you too. He smiled at her. The smile dimmed when he turned to address Miyako. Korede-san.
Is that evidence?
Miyako asked. Now Kensuke's smile disappeared.
It is communication of a personal nature.
He looked at Emma.
I've been practicing my poetry. Please be kind.
I'll read it later.
Emma stuffed the envelope into her back pocket, doing her best to hide how flattered and excited she felt. She didn't want to give Miyako another thing to get upset about today.
You received our inquiry about the kidnapping?
He nodded.
Yes. Let's talk in private.
Kensuke led them into a small conference room and closed the door. Emma sat, then stood again when she saw that Miyako wasn't going for a chair.
I've reviewed the case.
Kensuke sat and draped one arm over the back of his chair, angling his body toward Emma.
It would be very unusual for a gang to do something like this, in my opinion.
Thank you, but we were not asking for your opinion, Maeda-san.
Miyako managed to make the honorific sound like an insult.
We were asking if you had come across any indication that one of the gangs had dealings that intersected with the facts of this case.
The answer is no, and I'm telling you why this is a wild duck chase.
Emma resisted the urge to correct him, which might prolong the conversation with an irrelevant tangent.
We appreciate your insights, Kensuke. Please continue.
Thank you, Emma.
She wished he wouldn't wink at her so much in public, especially not in front of Miyako.
The gangs want their business to be disrupted as little as possible, especially now, with that new legislation under consideration.
The anti-foreign mischief law?
Emma asked. Kensuke nodded.
Supported by Kobayashi and his hardliners.
Why is that relevant?
We suspect the gangs are trying to influence certain politicians, and they would obviously like to avoid any scrutiny there. Drawing attention to themselves by kidnapping a child would be ill-advised.
But is there any reason to believe they might secretly support a resistance kidnapping plot?
Miyako asked. Kensuke threw up his hands.
I can't read their minds, Miyako. I'm telling you what makes sense based on what I know. The gangs want to protect their business interests. A high-profile abduction like this, no matter how big the ransom, is more exposure than they've ever dared to incur. You need to look elsewhere for your culprits.
Fine. Miyako walked to the door.
Emma, let's go.
Kensuke stood and touched Emma's arm.
Let me know what you think of my poem.
She hoped she wasn't blushing.
Sure.
Emma and Miyako returned to the Major Crimes bullpen to find Liu and Wang in Nishimura's office, standing behind Ting as he argued with the superintendent.
This is outrageous,
Ting was saying as Nishimura waved Emma and Miyako in through the open doorway.
Colonel Ting, you and your detectives are guests in our city.
Nishimura said as Emma and Miyako slid in and made wallflowers of themselves at the back of the room.
And what I find outrageous is that one of them has shot and killed an unarmed Japanese citizen. That citizen was a member of the so-called resistance. My understanding is that the evidence found in his home is incontrovertible.
Ting stepped forward to lean over Nishimura's desk.
How do you think my government will respond when I tell them that you refuse to share information that might aid in the recovery of my daughter? The evidence connecting Suzuki Masahiro to the resistance is circumstantial, and we have seen that your government can be overzealous when pursuing suspected resistance members. I'm sure you all know about the so-called defector we recently hosted here.
Emma stiffened and wondered if she was witnessing one of the international incidents that Santiago had always warned her to avoid starting. Ting jabbed a finger at Nishimura.
I want the name of your supervisor.
Nishimura opened his desk drawer and produced a business card.
I think you'll find his disposition very similar to my own. Then I'll go to his supervisor.
Ting snatched the card out of Nishimura's fingers.
I am the Chief Liaison Officer to the Japanese government for the People's Republic of China. I will go as high up your chain of command as necessary to resolve this disgraceful obstruction.
Miyako was surprised, considering the conversation Nishimura had just had with Ting, that the superintendent directed her and Emma to take detectives Liu and Wang to visit the data miners. Nishimura explained that there was information relevant to the kidnapping case that they all ought to review together. Data miner Tanaka met them in the archives section. She was initially very polite to the two plainclothes officers she didn't recognize, then immediately cool and withdrawn when Miyako introduced them as Chinese detectives. "They're assisting us with the investigation," Miyako explained. Tanaka narrowed her eyes at Wong, who still hadn't said a word.
I see. They were helpful in detaining our last suspect,
Emma said.
The superintendent said you had information about Masahiro Suzuki?
Tanaka frowned. I heard that Suzuki Masahiro was shot and killed outside his apartment building.
That's true.
Emma side-eyed Liu. Miyako approved of how well Tanaka was controlling her facial expressions. It's unfortunate that we can't question him. We have mapped out a number of his friends and acquaintances. Let me show you. She led the four detectives to a wall screen displaying a social network graph. Square images of people's faces connected by glowing lines of different colors. Masahiro Suzuki's face was in the center of the network. Tanaka used 2 fingers to spin the 3-dimensional visualization. Each color indicates a connection of a different nature. Our first step is to prioritize which persons to examine first.
I have a better idea.
Liu popped his gum.
How many of his associates have you identified here?
47. Liu turned to Miyako.
Do you have 47 uniformed officers in this police department?
Miyako didn't like where this was going.
Those officers have their own job responsibilities. This is our case.
We don't have time to waste. We need to go wide. Go out and question all of these people at the same time, so they can't warn each other that we're coming.
Even if we could get authorization for such an expansive operation, that would set an awful precedent for appropriation of resources in the future.
And it sends a very strong signal to anyone who's watching,
Emma said.
If the resistance thinks the police are gearing up for an even bigger sweep, they might get nervous and decide to retaliate. Or speed up the timetable on anything else they're planning.
Good. Then we disrupt their activities and make it harder for them to cause trouble,
Liu said.
Why are you arguing against that? Don't the police want to stop criminals here?
The police want to protect people, Miyako said. You don't have to live here. I do.
Her sleeve buzzed, and she was grateful for the interruption. Emma was also checking her sleeve.
Sato,
Miyako said, and read the rest of the message silently to herself.
Who's that?
Liu asked.
Forensics,
Emma replied.
He's got something from the boat.
Emma made sure that Miyako led the way to the CSI labs, putting herself between her partner and Liu's smart mouth. Wong still had an unlit cigarette clamped between his thin lips, and Emma wondered why he didn't just chew gum like his partner. The fake fruit flavor of his scented nicotine was starting to give her a headache. Also a craving for cocktails. Sato's work area in the lab was covered with at least a dozen of the paper strips from the boat, with the rest piled in clear plastic evidence bags. Miyako once again explained the situation with the Chinese detectives, and Emma noticed that Sato seemed more indifferent than Tanaka had been. Was he just better at hiding his feelings? Emma couldn't imagine any Japanese citizens in Tokyo, especially those who had lived through the war, feeling kindly or even neutral toward the Chinese.
We analyzed the banners from the boat,
Sato said.
It's thermal printer paper. The kind that comes in rolls and is used in wireless credit transaction terminals.
A receipt printer?
Emma asked.
Exactly. Once we knew that, we were able to find a watermark in the paper. It appears in half-meter intervals along the strip, so we had to search most of them before finding one that the kidnappers were careless enough to include. Is he always this long-winded?
Liu asked. Emma had to agree.
You're killing us, Sato. Get to the point.
Rokuda ride,
Sato said. The taxicab company? Miyako asked.
Self-driving taxicabs. They've become quite popular. You just swipe a credit card or tap your sleeve to pay. But the vehicles must by law always provide a paper receipt. So the company uses the simplest receipt printers available, which also makes the system easy to reprogram, and the least expensive paper stock.
So we're looking for a creepy taxicab driver,
Liu said.
He literally just said they were self-driving cars,
Emma said.
Whatever. Give us the address for this Rokuda place,
Liu said to Sato. Sato looked to Miyako.
Inspector?
Send it to me. She turned to Liu. We'll meet you in the garage. Liu grumbled and waved Wong out the door.
Come on. At least you can smoke down there.
Sato brought his tablet over to Miyako and bumped it against her sleeve, which lit up with a data transfer. He said something to her in a low voice. Emma couldn't quite make it out, but Miyako's face twitched when she heard it. Thank you, Sato-san, she said, then turned to Emma. Let's go. Emma waited until they were almost to the garage before stopping Miyako in the empty corridor.
What did Sato say to you back there?
They found fingerprints on several of those paper strips.
What? Whose prints?
Emma was a bit shocked that Sato had concealed this. Unknown. They didn't match anything in our records. They were child-sized fingerprints. Act 4. Major Santiago Vargas had visited Ninth Step Station before, but he had never parked a car in the labyrinthine garage. When he finally found the elevator after a few minutes of wandering, he nearly ran into Emma and Miyako on their way out.
Major.
Emma waved at Miyako.
Go ahead, I'll catch up.
Nice station, Santiago said as Miyako left. Don't get too comfortable, though.
Wouldn't dream of it. You looking for me?
I'm here to pick up that stray fuel cell. But actually, I do have something for you.
Santiago worked his data sleeve and showed her the alert he had received that morning.
Another shipment matching the parameters you specified.
Emma raised her own sleeve.
Bump that to me?
Sure.
He transferred the data.
You want to tell me what you're looking for exactly? I could get into it in my copious free time.
No, someone might be looking over your shoulder. Santiago was pretty sure he knew exactly who she meant.
I can be discreet. I'd smell the vape from a mile away.
Emma scoffed.
Thanks, but this is my thing. I appreciate the heads up, but you don't need to get involved.
Her sleeve buzzed.
That's my partner. I should go.
Santiago nodded.
Have fun catching bad guys.
Always do.
Liu and Wang were already out of their car when Miyako and Emma arrived at Rokuda Ride. Miyako turned off the auto-drive function on their car and made sure when parking that they would block in the Chinese vehicle. At least she and Emma would have a head start when leaving this place, hopefully with another lead. They found Liu and Wang in the office of the supervisor on duty, a stout woman named Hashimoto. The two men seemed confounded by the slight country accent in her Japanese speech. Miyako stepped in, making no effort to be polite when shouldering Liu aside, and Hashimoto seemed relieved. Hashimoto-san, Miyako said after she had introduced Emma and herself. We would appreciate any help you can provide.
Of course,
Hashimoto said.
They said a child has been abducted? Horrible. What a world.
We're looking for any Rokuda vehicles that may have been in this area within the last day or two. Miyako brought up a map on her sleeve and showed it to Hashimoto.
Let me see.
Hashimoto picked up a tablet and bumped it against Miyako's sleeve to get the coordinates.
All our vehicles are GPS radio tracked at all times.
To make deployment and route selection more efficient, it will just take a moment to call up those logs.
The map on her tablet lit up with lines crisscrossing the city, and she used 2 fingers to zoom into the area around Yumenoshima Marina. But there were no vehicle tracks passing anywhere near Pier 19.
I'm sorry, Inspector. It doesn't appear that any of our vehicles traveled to that area.
Miyako turned to Emma.
Did you receive that confirming surveillance footage from data miner Tanaka?
She had issued the request before they had left the station.
Right here.
Emma stepped forward and held up her sleeve. The video clip from a street surveillance camera clearly showed a taxicab with the Rokuda Ride logo emblazoned across its side, turning off the main road and heading for the marina.
That is one of your company's cabs, isn't it?
Hashimoto frowned.
Is it possible to see that license plate? And can you stop the image when one of the windows is in view?
Emma nodded and found 2 still frames, one of the back of the cab and another showing a 4-digit number in the corner of the driver's side window. Hashimoto worked her tablet and snapped her fingers.
Aha! That is one of our vehicles, but it was stolen several weeks ago. We reported the theft to the police. You should be able to verify the dates in your records.
Miyako entered the query on her sleeve, and the result came up immediately.
My apologies, Hashimoto-san. The marina's security cameras are not tied into the police system. Otherwise, the proper authorities would have been notified sooner. I'll make sure our vehicle theft division is informed immediately.
She thanked Hashimoto and ushered the other detectives outside. Leo made a fuss when he saw where Miyako had parked.
Come on, move your crappy modular,
he called. Miyako stood by the side of the Tokyo MPD vehicle, making no move to unlock it.
We're going back to the station, right? To see if the data girls can track that stolen cab?
Miyako looked down the road, shielding her brow from the sun with one hand.
It's such a beautiful day, Higashi-san. It seems a shame to spend it sitting inside a car.
Emma gave her a sly grin.
I agree, Koreda-san. I believe there's a subway stop just a short walk from here, on the Chiyoda line that goes directly past Ninth Step Station.
Indeed there is. And this is such a well-trafficked part of the city. I'm sure other police will be along soon who will benefit from the use of this vehicle.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Liu shouted, standing next to his Chinese car.
This is obstruction!
I'm so sorry, Detective,
Miyako said.
But we know this part of the city better than you, our honored guests. You are welcome to walk with us and take advantage of Tokyo's world-class public transit system. We would be happy to be your guides.
Or, hey,
Emma said, waving over their heads.
You could just catch a cab. See you back at the cop shop, boys.
Miyako was very proud of herself for going an entire city block before bursting into laughter. Emma and Miyako were already in the data archives reviewing a slew of footage provided by data miner Tanaka when Liu joined them, grumbling about Hashimoto was probably working for the resistance herself. Wong followed, reeking of raspberries.
That's the last surveillance video.
Miyako slid one final piece of footage into the shared display between her and Emma's workstations.
The cab was definitely in Odaiba during the protests. See?
How do you do that?
Emma had barely started to make sense of the map with all the data overlays on top of it, and Miyako was already drawing conclusions.
Some people speed read. Look at this cluster.
Miyako zoomed in the map on a spit of land near the water.
The cab keeps returning to this location near Harumi Wharf.
She opened a small array of windows, all showing the cab turning down a side street and disappearing.
We lose sight of it after that turn, but the building at the end of that street is a large warehouse. It was wrecked during the war by a drone attack on the wharf and never fully rebuilt.
Perfect place for a resistance hideout.
Okay.
Liu clapped his hands.
Let's go.
He and Wong had indeed abandoned their own car back at Rokuda Ride, So Miyako drove all 4 of them to the wharf in a modular Tokyo police vehicle. They stopped just short of the turn they had seen the stolen cab making, and Emma deployed one of her drones to scout ahead.
3 packs, she reported.
That means people, Miyako explained before the Chinese could ask.
How are you going to do this?
She tugged a dark watch cap down over her hair.
Are we going on a jewel heist?
Liu pointed at her head.
Pay attention. These all look like blind corners.
Emma indicated the sides of the warehouse on her sleeve map.
We go 2 by 2. See if we can surprise them. I didn't see anything that might be a gun, so let's stick to non-lethal force for now.
She glared at Liu as she said the last part.
It's not like I wanted to shoot him.
Liu grumbled, pulling out a telescoping baton.
Wait.
Miyako held up one hand.
You hear that?
They all crouched down as the stolen cab approached, its electric motor purring, and turned the corner with a soft skid. Emma was pretty sure it wouldn't have made such a hard turn with passengers inside, and she maneuvered her drone to double-check.
Cab's empty. Pack's coming out to meet it.
She watched the drone feed in her eye.
Go now, while they're distracted.
They ran forward, split into pairs, and came around the warehouse, brandishing their batons and shouting. The 3 people turned out to be teenagers, 2 boys and 1 girl. Miyako and Wang held them at the back of the cab while Emma and Liu checked the inside of the warehouse. The drone's infrared cameras confirmed that nobody else was around. Wang tied restraints around the teenagers' wrists and ankles. Miyako sat them on the ground next to the cab and paced in front of them. Emma looked inside the cab and saw a paper tray full of propaganda leaflets like the one from Masahiro Suzuki's apartment, feeding into a drop chute that would release them from underneath the vehicle's license plate. The exposed payment terminal in the back seat had a flash drive plugged into it, presumably downloading all the credit information it had stolen from unsuspecting passengers.
We don't care about your propaganda or your credit theft,
Miyako said to the teens.
We don't,
Liu said. Emma shushed him.
We just care about finding the child,
Miyako continued.
Where is she?
We don't know what you're talking about,
said one of the boys, a burly wrestler type with a thick mustache.
We don't mess around with children,
said the other boy, who had a shaved head. Miyako snapped her tonfa up to indicate the vehicle, making all 3 teens flinch.
Your cab was seen near the protests in Odaiba this morning. Why did you send it there?
We don't control its route,
Mustache Wrestler said.
Bullshit.
Emma held up one of the propaganda leaflets.
You're not distributing these at random. We give it to a general area to patrol,
the girl said.
It only releases leaflets when there are sufficient obstacles around itself to conceal the drop.
You're lying. Miyako crouched in front of her.
Tell us what you did. A 10-year-old child's life is at stake. What?
The girl looked confused.
No, we would never. The Yamashita-kai would kill us if we hurt a child.
The 2 boys shouted at her, and Emma rushed over to shove them aside and pull the girl to her feet. Admitting they were working with one of Tokyo's 3 biggest gangs was a major break, and Emma wanted to press the advantage.
Let me explain the situation very clearly.
Emma held the girl's face barely 3 centimeters from her own.
These 2 men standing behind me are Chinese detectives. Chinese?
The girl squeaked.
Yeah. They're here because that kid we're looking for is the daughter of a high-ranking Chinese government official.
Emma wasn't sure Ting was all that highly ranked, but it wasn't like Taxi Girl could fact-check his speech.
And maybe the Yamashita-kai don't want you messing with children, but who knows what they're up to that they don't tell you about. Now you're going to tell us everything you know. And there had better be something useful. They have an override.
Taxi Girl burst into tears like an anime character. Emma bit her tongue to keep from laughing out loud. That would have ruined the mood.
The Yamashita control Roku the right, and they gave us this cab to spread propaganda and also steal money.
Why would they do that?
Plausible deniability. We three have no direct ties to the Yamashita, and they're not the ones actually touching the cab. But they're the ones who reprogrammed it, and they told us they would reclaim it if they ever found us misusing it.
Emma glanced at Miyako, who nodded and went back to the two men on the ground.
Is this true? Tell me.
Mustache Wrestler and Shaved Head gave up the remaining details of their operation. After recording the confessions and summoning a uniformed patrol to take the teens into custody, Emma collected her drone. All 4 detectives walked back toward their own car. "That was an effective interrogation," Miyako said.
I've picked up a few tricks from watching you and Yamada,
Emma said.
We make a pretty good team, don't you think?
Miyako flashed a dirty look back at Liu and Wong. "I would prefer a smaller team."
Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to add a 5th wheel in addition to Sweet and Sour here.
Act 5. Miyako didn't love the idea of Kensuke joining them again, but she couldn't argue against it now that they knew the Yamashita Kai were involved. Emma put all the case information up on a display wall in the archives section of the police station. "This is unprecedented," Kensuke said. "The gangs have never done anything like this. Certainly children have been caught in the crossfire before, but nobody has ever targeted them specifically."
Not even if they were Chinese?
Liu asked.
We're seeing a lot of unprecedented crimes these days,
Miyako said. Liu ignored her.
Higashi-san, what are we doing now exactly?
Reinterpreting.
Emma moved windows around the display.
Knowing the Yamashita Kai are involved in this kidnapping should give us a different perspective.
She pulled up the original ransom video.
Miyako, do you think the data miners can tell us any more about this video? I know they analyzed the image for location indicators before, but is there anything in the video itself that might help us?
Tanaka said whoever uploaded it scrubbed out all the metadata first. We can't tell what kind of device was used to record the video.
What about this?
Emma froze the video on the ransom demand text.
Can they identify what font that is? Then find out which phones or computers use it as a default?
I'll go ask them. Miyako stood but hesitated before leaving the room.
It's so ugly,
Liu grumbled, stepping closer to the display.
Look at that.
He jabbed a finger against the wall, bending the display surface under the pressure and making Miyako wince.
This downstroke is way too short. Like whoever designed this font didn't even care how readable it was.
He removed his finger and turned back to face the others.
I bet it was some cut-rate Japanese designer. Probably copied an existing commercial typeface and made just enough modifications so they wouldn't be sued for intellectual property theft.
He stopped talking when Wong removed the unlit cigarette from his lips, tucked it into the breast pocket of his suit jacket, and approached the display wall. Liu stepped aside. Miyako stopped in the doorway and turned back to watch. What's happening now? Kensuke asked.
Quiet,
Emma said. Wong looked at her and pointed at one corner of the screen. He made a gesture with his thumb and forefinger, pulling them apart.
You want me to magnify that image?
Wong nodded, then pointed at 2 other images and made the same gesture. Miyako walked back toward the wall.
All 3 of those, sure.
Emma shrunk the video window and pulled the new images over. They were evidence photos of 3 of the receipt paper banners from the boat. She arranged them in a column next to the frozen video. Wong stared at each image intently for a few seconds, then turned to face the room. He used his right hand to point to the kanji for she that appeared in each of the boat banners. He pointed at each one in turn, going down the column. Yes, it's the same word, Miyako said, unsure what he was trying to convey, but nonetheless intrigued. Wang nodded, then used his left hand to indicate the same character in the original ransom video. It took Miyako a couple of seconds to notice what he was showing them. It's the same word. She stepped closer. But the kanji is rendered differently.
Different font?
Emma said. No, look. Miyako pointed at one of the other kanji. The character for again is identical everywhere, and her is the same on all the papers. But in the video, holy shit! Emma moved closer.
You're right. That stroke is thicker, that one's shorter, and the angle of the radical on the left is sharper over here.
She stared at Wang.
Good eye, detective.
So the video looks weird. Or the printer in that illegally modified taxicab was messed up.
Liu said.
I don't see why this matters.
These are not image artifacts. Miyako worked the screen to pull up an image analysis program.
This is font code.
A what?
Font code. There are subtle variations in how each character is rendered. Almost imperceptible to humans, but easily distinguished by a computer program. Like a QR code, but hidden inside what appears to be normal text.
Miyako overlaid the two her kanjis to highlight the differences.
That's at least 16 bits of information right there.
That could be an entirely different message hidden in there,
Emma said.
If it was encoded in a way that used fewer bits, you could get a much longer message into a very short phrase written in Chinese.
But why would anyone do this?
Kensuke waved his hands at the screen.
Who would the kidnappers be trying to communicate with? They must have known the only people looking at this would be the police.
Maybe someone in the police department is working with...
Liu started to say.
Don't even joke about that,
Kensuke said with uncharacteristic anger.
Motherfucker!
Emma slapped her palm against the wall, making Miyako jump.
Okay, sorry,
Liu said.
Not you, asshole. For once.
Emma looked at Miyako.
Where the fuck is Colonel Ting?
Emma couldn't blame Nishimura for not wanting to keep closer tabs on Ting, especially since they all expected he would be coming back to bother them soon. Nishimura confirmed that his supervisor in the police department had never gotten a visit from Ting, and none of the politicians Ting had threatened to leverage had heard from him either. Wang and Liu tried contacting Ting on their mobile phones, but their calls and texts went unanswered. Miyako asked the data miners to see if they could trace Ting by using his phone's location data, but he had apparently turned it off as soon as he had left the station that morning.
Fucking spooks,
Emma grumbled.
Who knows how long he's been planning this?
She turned to Liu and Wang.
Any idea what he might be into?
Ting seemed like someone with his fingers in a lot of dirty pies. Kind of like another liaison officer who Emma knew all too well. Liu shrugged.
We don't know the lieutenant colonel very well.
Wang snapped his fingers and tapped Liu on the shoulder, then held a fist up in front of his chest and rotated his forearm back and forth.
Fuck, you're right.
Liu pulled out his phone.
Please feel free to share with the rest of the class,
Emma said.
Lieutenant Colonel Ting's driver.
Liu jabbed at his phone.
We've seen him before, driving other government officials around. He's crazy about baseball.
He held up his phone to Miyako.
Can your data girl spoof an alert to this phone number?
Data miners, Miyako corrected, copying the information to her sleeve.
And yes, they can send a hyperlink that will give us his location before redirecting to an actual website. Are you sure he'll click through?
Trust me. Just mention something about the Saitama Seibu Lions and trading players. He'll be all over it.
It took Tanaka and her team just a few minutes to craft the fake alert. And as Liu predicted, Ting's driver clicked through right away. Miyako drove the 4 detectives to the location, while Emma once again lectured Liu and Wang on the importance of using appropriate force when detaining suspects. They found Ting's driver parked outside a building that Kensuke had confirmed was sometimes used by the Yamashita Kai. Wang volunteered to distract the driver. Apparently, he was also a flavor vape aficionado, while the other 3 detectives snuck into the basement. They found a makeshift medical tent in the middle of a bare concrete room. Emma couldn't see clearly through the thick plastic noren separating the single patient bed from the rest of the room, but she could make out at least 2 bodies moving inside. And she heard a child's voice. A young girl saying something about robots. Emma was about to lay out a tactical plan for approaching the target when Liu rushed forward, plowed through the plastic barrier, and began shouting in Chinese. The girl screamed, and another male voice began shouting back. Emma and Miyako ran up to join Liu and hopefully prevent getting anyone killed. Emma skidded to a halt just inside the medical tent, not quite believing what she was seeing. Colonel Ting sat on the bed, his legs dangling over the side, his right thigh heavily bandaged. On the floor beside him sat his daughter Annie, clutching 2 toy robots to her chest.
Okay, I'll say it,
Emma said.
What the fuck, Lieutenant Colonel?
Ting was holding up both hands, and he nodded at the gun that Emma had aimed at the floor.
You can put away your weapons. We're in no danger here.
Can you confirm that?
Liu asked Emma. Emma holstered her firearm and worked her sleeve to do an infrared scan with her eye. There were no heat signatures, and nothing big enough for someone to hide behind.
Yeah, we're clear.
She turned off the eye and glared at Ting.
No, seriously, what the fuck?
He's got a new leg. Miyako pointed at the bandaged thigh.
Cloned from his own DNA, I'm guessing. God in heaven,
Liu said.
You can do that here?
There is a robust body modification subculture in Tokyo. But why risk so much?
Cancer.
Ting said.
In my leg. In the bone.
I'm pretty sure regular doctors can fix that without replacing an entire leg,
Emma said.
And without using dangerous healing drugs.
Rapid healing agents worked well enough for the Japanese during the war. And the Yamashita Kai have extensive experience with body modifications.
Ting fixed Miyako with a hard glare.
I couldn't risk a long hospital stay. We Chinese have factions too. I have a position to protect within my government. If I am seen as weak, I lose power, and I can't be effective at my work.
But your own daughter?
Emma pointed at Annie.
You'd put her in danger to help yourself? I volunteered.
Annie waved a robot in the air.
I wanted to help my dad. And I did, didn't I?
Ting smiled.
Yes, Annie. You were very helpful.
The video was my idea. Were you convinced by my acting? I had to use some glycerin drops to get the tears going, but the dialogue was all improvised.
Mother. Emma caught herself mid-curse. The fingerprints all over those receipts.
That was my idea too.
Annie jumped up and down, waving both robots around.
They were going to use just one banner, but I said no. It's creepier if everything's covered. I also offered to bleed on the boat, but we decided that was too much.
She looked at Emma.
We didn't want you to get too worked up.
Let me guess,
Emma said, addressing the lieutenant colonel.
You're the kind of father who can't say no, no matter how ridiculous the kid's demands are. Hey, I'm not ridiculous.
Ting stood, wincing as he put weight on his new leg.
The cancer was incurable. I had to stop it before it spread.
He nodded at Annie.
If I get sick,
If I die, who protects her? I did this for my family above all.
I guess you don't have a family.
Annie pointed a robot at Emma. Emma stared at the kid for a moment before deciding that dressing her down probably wouldn't have much of an effect. She also decided not to feel bad about cursing so much in front of a 10-year-old. Surely Annie had heard worse while riding around with the Yamashita-kai.
How did you pay them?
Miyako asked as Ting walked over to where his street clothes were hanging from an IV rack.
Don't worry, Inspector. It was a barter agreement. No money laundering to run afoul of your new legislation.
Emma stepped forward.
I'm sure my American friends would be very interested in learning what you traded to an organized crime syndicate in exchange for this elaborate medical procedure.
Ting gave her a toothy grin.
The Americans don't need to worry, Lieutenant. You all have more than enough guns of your own.
Miyako and Emma drove Liu and Wang to the checkpoint at the Chinese border, where their impounded GE-7 had been towed for release. Emma actually shook Liu's hand in farewell, but Miyako couldn't bring herself to do it. She gave him the slightest bow she could manage without seeming openly insulting. He gave her a lopsided smile and bowed in return.
Koreda-san,
he said.
I hope we never meet again.
The feeling is mutual. Miyako almost smiled.
Do you think it's true? Colonel Ting really supplied weapons to the Yamashita-kai?
Liu sighed.
We'll look into it. Ting received the guns from somewhere. He has a lot of connections, but that means there will be weak links.
Why would he want to arm Japanese criminals?
Emma wondered out loud.
Especially ones who are working with the resistance.
Ting isn't like us. He's more interested in keeping power than in keeping the peace.
War is good for business when you're a spy, Miyako said bitterly.
War is never good.
Liu turned to his partner.
Ready to go?
Wang nodded, dropped his cigarette onto the ground and snuffed it out with one heel, then bowed deeply at Emma and Miyako.
Otsukare-sama deshita.
He said aloud, surprising Miyako with his deep voice and articulate Japanese.
Sayonara.
Emma and Miyako watched as the two Chinese detectives passed through the checkpoint. Then Miyako tugged at the elbow of Emma's jacket, and they hurried off before Liu could come back and complain about the dents in his car door.
You're listening to Ninth Step Murders, Episode 6, by Curtis C. Chen. Starring Emily Wu Zeller. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. Ninth Step Murders is written by Malka Older, Curtis C. Chen, Jacqueline Koyanagi, and Fran Wilde. It is executive produced by Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Audio production, voice direction, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.